Hello, welcome to JewelleryMaker Academy. I'm Alison Tarry and today we're going to be looking at Wirework Cabochon Settings. This is where we're going to create settings for cabochons using wire. So we use two different gauges of wire. We use a core wire. These are usually a 1mm, a 0.8mm. You can go up to, if you've got a big chunky stone, you can go up to your heavier gauges of 1.5, 2mm. But the majority are done with 1mm and 0.8 and then 0.4 and 0.25. So you need two different great gauges of wire basically. You need a core wire, structural wire, and then you need one that's at least 2 gauges below. So if you're doing 0.8, you can do 0.25, you can do 0.4. I wouldn't do 0.25 with a heavier gauge. So it's just getting those sorted, and we're going to be working with those. We need a selection of cabochons. Cabochons can be all shapes and sizes. You can have triangles, you can have organic shapes, it can be a shell. So you've got to be aware that you need to have a setting that will work with different shapes, and we'll go through that when we explore some different settings. You're going to need some wire cutters. If you can do flush cutters, that's better. You can still do it with side cutters. It's just a little bit more difficult. Some round nose pliers, some chain nose pliers, some flat nose pliers, and a baling pliers. This will help you bend over the bail and still keep that rounded shape. So that's the basics. You can expand your repertoire of tools as you go along, but that's what you need to get going really. So now let's go into chapter 1 and start making settings. So in this chapter, we're going to look at a simple setting. We're going to be using one piece of 0.8 or 1mm wire, depending on the size and thickness of your cabochon. So if it was a cabochon that's that sort of size, I'd be quite happy to do that with 0.8. For something that's obviously a bit more robust, I'm doing it with the 1mm. But you can tailor that to whatever. So we're just using it with the 1mm wire, and what we're going to do is we're going to sort of form the front here and take it around the back and then go up the back and come back forward. So we're kind of catching it at the top of the bottom. So how does that work with the cabochon? If it's an irregular shape, then it's quite easy to find your points. An oval shape, what you've got to do is what I call the point of no return. So when you're fixing where a cabochon is, it doesn't matter whether it's a prong setting, whether it's a simple setting like this, whether it's one of the many other pointed settings, unlike something like a netted which goes all the way around, so it doesn't matter. You need to find the point where the cabochon can't get through. So by that I mean, if I put my fingers there, that cabochon can't push between my fingers. If I do it there, there's not much to stop that cabochon going through. So you've got to find that point. So if I took this and put 2 points there and 2 points there, that cabochon would slide out one way or the other. So you've got to find that point where it can't push. So this is going to be vertical. Let me turn it that way so it's easier. This is going to be a vertical cabochon. So I don't want it to slip out of the bottom. So I've got to have it. If you imagine taking something like a round so if I give you some different examples here, and this goes with a lot of the settings. If you take something like this, which is quite symmetrical, almost make it into a squared off version of itself, so that this line here, I'm going to use this piece of wire, comes down like that, and you can see there where it starts curving away. Where it starts curving away, you want to be thinking that's the point of no return. And if you hold it, then that's where it's not going to pop out of. Soon as you've gone closer up there, it's easy for that to force through. So when you've got a round is a little bit more, you can still do the same. So you can put 4 prongs in, you can put as many prongs in as you like. The more prongs you have, the more secure it is. You can do 3 prongs on a round as well, but again they've got to be equal to stop it going through any one of them. So an oval, if it's an oval that's horizontal, again you've got to stop it coming out the side, but you've also got to think top and bottom as well, so you don't want too far to that side so that they can push out through like that. So you've got to think about where you need this point, and as you're making it you need to test it at that point, so that you know at that stage. You don't want to finish your setting and then go portion it falls out. You can glue it in, but that's not the point of this. So we know we need to go below. This is a very shallow one, so this is quite a difficult one to do. So by shallow I mean, let me fetch that one back. That's more rounded, so you've got very definite points. This has got a very narrow point. So you've got to be aware of things like that. The actual piece has got a point, so it's a teardrop shape. That's very easy because you know you've got a point there to do. So we're going to start in the middle of our wire, find the centre of the wire, and I'm putting it sideways only because I'll get more on the screen. So we need it to sort of fit there and come down here. So at this point we're going to turn it sideways. So we want to turn it out a bit first, so that it's going to go there. And then can you see where that point is going? That's quite high, so I'm just going to ease it round a little bit to be a little bit lower. And then I'm going to, I use my rule of thumb or thumbnail. So if my thumbnail will follow that shape, I know I can do it about there. You can measure it, you can draw around it. However, be aware if you do draw around it, that is going to be bigger than where you want it. So that point there is actually going to sit nicely, and we're going to come down this way. So we want to turn these almost straight away, and then we want to bend them so that they follow the cabochon round to the back. So they're then hugging the bottom of that. So you can either do it, with some it's an awkward shape, so you can either do it and bend it itself. With the 1 mil, it's a little bit more difficult, so I'm going to twist that a little bit just to get it started. If you want, and you look at the sort of curve, then there's nothing to stop you using a baling plier to get that curve going. So it kind of helps you, especially if you've got dexterity issues, to create that shape. So now we've got this bottom of this cage starting. We know we need to get that one a bit tighter round. Let's make it with a smaller one and pull that round a bit more. So ultimately we want this to sit underneath that cabochon. So you can see now that that cabochon's not going through there. So we know we're in the right place. So now we can take those 2 wires and we're going to cross them over the back. So I'm going to pull them in to get a start, put my cabochon in place, and I want to meet those wires at the back. Now where they're going to meet, and I'm going to move my fingers in a minute. There we go. So where they're meeting at the back, we're actually going to take those straight up the middle. So where they meet, you're now going to turn them so they're going to be parallel and going up the centre of this cabochon. And then we're going to just bind it together. Again, always at each stage, you're checking that that is not going anywhere out. So that is, turn it over. And don't worry, they always go a bit flippy floppy to begin with. Make sure, check from the front that it's in the right place. We need a little bit more, there we go, around. So that's now hugging the bottom of that cabochon. And if you'll notice on the actual example I've got finished, that's got a V in, it fits the shape, it's got a point. It would look silly with having a V in here. You could put it as a V, but you've got a rounded edge, so you want a rounded edge there. So now we're going to take the 2 wires. If you wanted, you could do a weave up here, but the easiest thing to do is to just bind them. So we're going to take some 0.25 wire, 0.4 wire, and I'm going to do it off the reel, because that way you don't waste your wire. And we're going to start, fetch these a bit further round so that they're not getting in the way. And all we're going to do is bind around. So we're going to go, I'm going to cut this off here because otherwise you're going to hear it going around the reel all the time. But I would, at home, I would work off the reel. And we're just going to bind up. Now you can do it as loosely as you want. It's at the back. However, your jewellery, always think when you're making your jewellery, can it flip around? If it's a bracelet and it's at the back, is anybody going to see it? Arguably no. So it's pride that's doing it. But if it's a pendant, it can flip over. So try and keep the back of your pendant as neat as the front of your pendant. And that will just, it's just a finishing touch. And that way, if it does flip around, you don't have to worry because it still looks tidy and it'll still look okay. So we're keeping going round, and all I'm doing is keeping it tight to each other and doing a nice simple bind around the 2 halves of the 1 mil. So I've sped it up, I'm going over. So the piece of wire I've got, the piece of 1 mil is a lot longer than I need. I would always rather have it too long than too short. I'm going to put my tail end through the centre, and then I can pull that a bit like a door wedge. You can pull it between the two and then trim it off, and you know that's never going to catch anybody. We're then going to flip our cabochon over. So I would say you want to come probably about 2/3 of the way up before we go out again for this one. So I would come up to here, so I'll do a little bit further winding. So when you're measuring your cabochon for how much wire you want to be able to go pretty much all the way around the cabochon and probably have an extra 5 to 10 centimetres depending on how cautious you feel. I would say at least 5 centimetres each side, a couple of inches each side. Depending on the bail you want to do, I'm just going to do a straight over wrapped bail to go with the wrap at the back. So we've gone plenty up there, and you can see this isn't going anywhere out of there. That's as secure as you like. I'm going to actually take off a couple of loops, and then I'm going to open up the wires. So I'm going to open up those 2 wires, fetch my 0.4 between, and then I can trim off. And now when we put that on there, we're going to fetch these wires. So we want to go wide out and fetch them up and over. So trying to get them level. There we go. Now that is going to be quite secure. So make sure it's fitted in the bottom. Now, if you want to mimic the top with the bottom, we're going to come in, put an angle there and then curve, and then that will actually give you that synchronized pattern. So we're going to put you want to do it on the top, because that's the other thing with this. Not only have you got the side, but you've got the top to cope with as well. You've got to make sure that hugs over that curve line so that it's actually securing the cabochon in place. So I've got one there. Again, if you want, you can measure that, and then we're going to curve it round so that it comes to the center. And we see we've got this sort of rounded going on, and then we're going to twist away before we start our bail. So if I hold that now, I can already see I need to bend this one a little bit further, but that cabochon is not going anywhere. That is securely caught. If you can't do that, then you need to go back and look at where's it loose, which bit needs tightening, because you do it at this stage and then you know you've got it secure. Right, so make sure those are even. Again, if you want to measure it, you can measure it. And then we're going to take these and start binding them to form a loop. So again, I know now I can cut off quite a bit of that in excess, which speeds up your wrapping. There we go. And we're going to go back to our 0.25, our 0.4 wire. Now, whether you want to go right from the start, I would start in the center and then bind those 2 together. Pull them out so they're sort of going at 90 degrees to your cabochon, and then kick out the top. Now that just means we're not going through it, that just means it's sort of securing where your wire's going. If you're going to feed through it, you'll be able to see it. Basically, when you kick out the top, what it does, if you're going through it, it's great, it gives you that funnel, but it also tells you which one's which, because these are going to try and flip like that. Now, if I had no kick, it makes it harder to see which one is which. So keep winding round. Can you see how they're trying to twist? And that's because I'm coming up this side and down the other. So it's naturally pulling this one up and pushing that one down. So every now and then, take your pliers and just give it a squidge to hold it in place. And to keep it tidy, you can also just fetch them together. So you can hold them as tight as you can, but they will have this tendency to twist, which once you get going is fine. There we go. And then you can start speeding up your wrapping. Still keep it tidy, still keep it so that it's by each other. And then make sure your wire's not getting too twisted. And as I'm going along this, you notice I'm moving my fingers to keep as close to where I'm wrapping as possible. You don't want to be holding down here and wrapping because it gives the wire chance to move. So whenever you're doing wire work, always have your fingers as close to that weave point as possible. So I'm going to need a little bit more to do a little wrap over bail. And as I do it, I'm almost crossing over them, which it does lead occasionally to you doing that, but it just means you're minimizing the gapping and then you push it down. So a little bit more, that should be enough. We're then going to ease that back a little bit because you don't want the bail coming from here, so we're going to ease that back a bit, and then we want to twist the bail. So I've sort of put a curve in it. We're going to take the bail and put it in your bailing pliers. Now I've got a 6-step bailing pliers here, so you can decide. You're not likely to use that one or that one, but you can have a more petite bail if you want. You can do this without actually having the weaving if you like, but you want to be able to wrap it over. So I'm going to go for a more substantial, let's make it a little bit smaller than that, loop. And that sort of dictates what size chain you're going to be able to put through there. So you're looking at what size loop you want, and then you actually want this to meet in the middle. So you're going to have to flick out the end, make sure it hasn't twisted over as you've curved it. So by that, I'm going to take my other pliers and I'm just going to kick the bottom out, then I can put it back on my pliers and push that, so that now our bail is more or less meeting. We can now take some of this back off. You'll find as you're doing these, it's add a bit, take it off, add a bit, take it off very often, because it's not an exact science. So I've kicked that up a little bit more so that I can pull that and meet my bail there. So I know now that that is super secure. It's going to hold the chain of whatever you want, or cord, or whatever you want to add on it really securely. And then I'm going to take my 2 wires at the back here. Now what I've done on the example we've got there is I've actually done a figure of 8 through here, but you don't have to. So I'm just doing a little figure of 8, going round one, pass it through the middle, round the other one, and again that secures it in place, pass it through the middle, and I've just figure of 8'd down to the point where it crosses over the side arms, shall we say, of the setting. Here we go. Just sort of fills in the gap. Again, you're looking at neatness. I'm not going to go all the way down. Whoops, I've just pulled that out of shape. Not going to go all the way down, but you get the idea of that. and I'll show you on the other one in a second. So I'm going to trim off that wire there. Trim it if you can when it's coming from behind. So always trim it underneath, because you know it's never going to come to the forward then, and you know it's going to get trapped between the wire and the cabochon. So we're going to now put these under here. So taking this, I'm going to trim that to a few, maybe 3 or 4 mil beyond that wire. Get your flat nose pliers and just ease that wire up a little bit. And then you want to bend the wire over so that it will tuck underneath there. So again, use your flat nose pliers, lift that up, bend the wire and tuck it out of the way. Take your time, get them even. But that wire now will stay out of the way. That is super secure, and that setting, take the wire off the front, and then that setting is not going anywhere. So you can see this one is for an oval. The actual finished one is with a point, it's a teardrop shape, so you've got that V in it, but they've both got the same, it's got a bit further down the back, and that's a nice simple setting. You haven't got any, you don't have to do the figure of 8, so you've got simple binding and a little bit of wire bending. Just make sure you take your time to get those even, because mine aren't even. Okay, and that's how you do a simple cabochon setting. And now we're going to go on to the next chapter. So in this section, we're going to have a look at doing the bezel form of a wirework setting. So I've got a woven piece of wirework. If I lift that up to you, you can see the weave pattern there. So because there's 5 weaves, 5 cores, I've kept them to 0.8 just to give us that flexibility, because the more you have, obviously the stronger they are. You want it to be enough to go all the way around your cabochon, and then have about 10 centimetres each side to do your bail and the back of it. So obviously with this one, we're going to have to do something around the back, because that will stop it falling through that way when it's tight, but it obviously won't stop it popping back up. There's nothing to stop it. So we'll do that when we do the bail part. So first of all, we're going to do this weave. It's a zigzag weave. And it's with a 5 cores of your 0.8. If you've got a deeper cabochon, you can do 1 mil. You can make it 6-7 cores if you've got a really huge one, but that's going to make it very heavy. So I've got some shorter wires here. What I would say when you're doing something this big, obviously when you open that out, that's quite long. Start in the middle, work one way, come back to the middle and work the other way, because it gives you a solid hold. If you're holding it there and the rest coming way out, it makes it more unstable. So start in the middle and work your way out is the way to go. So we're going to grab a piece of wire. Again, I would work off the reel if you can. The reason I'm not here is because it does get quite noisy. So this is a 0.4 wire. This is a gunmetal which I'm using with rose gold 0.8. So like I said, you've got the sort of two separation. So if you can wrap 0.8 with 0.6, it's exceedingly difficult because the gauges are so close together that what happens is when you pull it, you'll pull the wire. It hasn't got the strength to hold the wire, especially if you've got soft wires. You'd have to work hard on them a bit to give them that little bit more strength. So I would leave it on the wire, take about 1.5 meters off the wire and leave the rest attached. And then spreading your wires out, if you want to label them so that you can see which they are, or use a little coloured felt tip on the end, then that's great. As you weave along, it will pull them closer and closer, but what it means is it's giving you an easy access. So we're going to start off with just a single loop. Now you're going to take that loop off when you turn it round, but it gives you that immediate spacing because each of these has got to have a 0.4 gap between the wires to be able to get the wire through. If they pull tight together, what happens is you don't get it close, so your wire won't go all the way up to the next one. So we're going to go twice around the 2 wires. So can you see that little gap there? You've still got that little gap maintained. You're not pulling it tight, so you haven't got a tight tension, but you've kept it even. Then you're going to come between the 2 wires. Let's call them 1 and 2. And then you're going to pull that tension tight. So I'm pushing it over to the other wires with my finger, but I'm also pulling it through. So it gives you a really neat wrap. We're then going to go 2 to 3. So we're going to go around there twice. Again, you're not pulling it tight, but you're pulling it so that it's sitting on those 2 wires. You're then going to come between them, force that wire right up to the other 2 and pull it tight at that point. Again, that gives you that nice and neat. And we're going to carry on around 3 and 4. Twice. And between them. And pull. If you want, you can use a ring setting mandrel or a clamp to hold these together. So if you get dexterity issues or you're struggling, use that and it gives you a bigger hand grip. And alternatively, you can actually tape those down with masking tape, with a low tack tape, to hold them, to stop them twisting over. Right, so you've gone twice around the top 2. Again, you're maintaining that gap because we're going to come back down, but you're actually coming down 3 wires. 1, 2, 3, and you're coming between 2 and 3. We're not going to pull that tight at that point because if you pull that tight, you'll pull these together. So we're going to keep it nice and even and then push that up. So you need to push it right up together. And that's why you don't pull it tight, because you'd not be able to do that. And again, coming down is harder because you haven't got the wire immediately next to it. Going up, you've got the wire immediately next to it, maintaining that gap for you. Coming down, you've got to self-regulate. So you're going to pull it through. You've got that bit of wire there, but not between these 2. So just make sure, sometimes I'll use my thumbnail just to push it across, just to give it a little, just to make sure you've got that little bit of gap there, because then you're coming below the 2 and going round the 3. Coming below the 3 to go round the bottom 2. So pulling it through. So that's your weave. We're going to go through that again. We're going to go up and then down. It's slightly different in the back. You have a heavier weave going up the back and it looks lighter going at the front. That's because that's going 3, 3, 3, 3, and that's going 1, 1, 1, 1. So it gives you a different feel. You'll get an uneven zigzag on one side and an even on the other. Both are valid. You can use whichever. It's predominantly, or traditionally, shall we say, this is considered the front and the other the back, but it really doesn't matter if you prefer the other way. The thing is the consistency. So again, because you've pulled it tight now, these have all come in a little bit. So we're going to make sure they're sitting in the right place, and I'm going to go up. So you're going 2, down 2, up 2, down 1. So I'm going to do this slightly quicker. Up 2, down 2, up 2, down 1, up 2, down 2, up 2, down 3, up 2. Hang on, that was 4, can't count. 3, up 2, down 2, up 2, down 3. And that's where this will start trying to clump together because of that down 3. So you're going to go doing the 2, 2, down 3, and then through the last 2, we're going to push that way up there. Make sure we've got that gap. And then if you come between the bottom 2, you're now ready to go. So that's where you're doing your zigzag. And like I say, it looks, you can see it more clearly there. It's shorter, shorter, long, or heavy, heavy. So you keep doing that until you've got the size of your cabochon. So we're going to put it in our cabochon, fetch it round. Now where your weaves finish, so if I turn that the other way, I've got the top weaves and they're going to nearly meet. So I would be inclined with this one, just want to show you, with this one I'm going to have an extra set. So I'm just going to whiz through an extra set. I've got a tail on each end just in case you need to maneuver it. And this is why you always have extra wire with your 0.4, because you don't know when you're going to adjust. So you're going to need to just whiz down, and you can finish so that they're offset. They don't have to both be going in the same way to finish. They don't have to finish facing the same way. It is entirely up to you. We're going to carry on going down and round the bottom, and then we're going to go whiz back up the row. There we go. You can ease the zigzags in and out, but what you find, if you start easing them out, you will start getting an uneven spacing. It's very difficult to maintain that spacing without doing without adding the extra zigzag in. So you can, if it's too long, very easily squidge it up. So you can tighten these up by pushing them together, but to try and pull them apart, you will get them so that they start becoming a little bit uneven. So now we should be perfect. They're going to come all the way round to meet. We're actually going to look at bending. So we want our bend for our bail to be right in the center of there. So you've got a lot of wires here. So initially you're going to curve them out. See how they cross over? So you just want these two acting like independent halves now. Get your wires separated, because then you can fetch the ends in together. The more you bend those out, the more you'll be able to fit those in together. Now, if you want, you can leave it there and put a cabochon in the middle. You can actually tighten these by wrapping around, which is what we're going to do here. So we're going to take that from there, and we're just going to pop this. Now I'm going to do one from each side, just one. And we're going to use these when it's sitting there to tighten it up, but we're not going to tighten it just yet, because if we tighten it, all it's going to do is pop off. But that will give us a sort of tensioning point when we've finished a little bit more. So now we're going to ease those in, and we're going to start with our bail. So we're going to take one of these almost straight up. So if you can see on the piece here, on the amethyst, then what we've got is a row of gemstones going up through the top. These you can add on, you don't have to, it's an additional. So what we'll go through what you need to do that as we go, but to keep it a little bit more simple, we can just do the weave, and you tend to do your bail, so you're ignoring the back two. We're ignoring those are going to form. If you remember at the start I said we need something to put along the back. Well, that's what these bottom two are going to be for. So we're going to use the four middle cores, sorry, the top two we're going to wrap around. We're going to go around the outside one twice, then we're going to go around the middle, splay those out a little bit, cross over, and you're doing like a figure of 8 in the middle. So this would be, if you want to put a gemstone on, put it on there. I'm leaving it off because it gives you a clearer view of what it's going to do. So you would put your gemstone in there and then go through there in your figure of 8, and then you're going to wrap around the other part of your bail. So this gives you quite a broad bail. Now we've done figure of 8 before. What I want to talk to you quickly about with this figure of 8 is we're keeping it quite broad, so you can either have it very, very tight and it will be quite basket weavy, or if you keep it a little bit more open, what happens is you get what I call like the side of a drum pattern, so it will open up your zigzag. So you're going to wrap more times around the outside to get that effect. So we're going to go 3 times there, through the middle, around that middle one, pop your gemstone on, through there if you want your gemstone, or you just want your detail in the middle, and then we're going to wrap. This time we're going to do 4 times around, and we're going to keep going, opening it up 3, 4 times around, so that now when you cross over, can you see if I was going straight it would go there, but because I'm crossing it over it's going to start giving you a crisscross effect. So I'm going to go to the middle, wrap around down there, through the middle, add my gemstone. So the gemstone will fetch that out a little bit. This will give you a little bit of an open weave, and then we're going to go down to meet that other one. 1, 2, 3, 4, and we come back. So you're starting to get that crisscross happening. So we're going to go in through there, back through there. So you just keep doing this all the way up, making sure you keep the 2 sides equal. This is something else. When you've got 0.8, while you're doing this, this is a lot less hard than the 1 mil. So you have to be more conscious of the fact that as you're wrapping, you can pull these through. So you start sort of end up with your wire down here somewhere. It's hard to do. As you're going narrow to wide, it's easier because it's trying to sort of keep it narrower. When we're going wide to narrow, that's where it becomes a little bit more difficult. So I'm just going to do a couple more, then we're going to turn it to go the other way. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to do 5 this time, and you can keep changing that. It doesn't matter. The wider you get, the more wraps you'll need, because what happens is the wider it is, the wraps actually get closer together. By that I mean where you cross it, it's got to go a longer distance so the angle is shallower, if that makes sense. So if you've got 2 things that are that close together, there you go, that close together, and you cross over them, your cross is quite shallow. As soon as you take them open, can you see how that thumb sort of shallows out? So your angle gets shallower. 3, 4, 5. Now you can do up to 10 of these before it starts getting a little bit too much. So I would do up to perhaps 10. But that is a personal preference. You can keep it so that it's really, really tight, and it gives you a very, very dense bail. So that is all down to personal preference. So when you've got to, what's your halfway point? Now I know this won't be your halfway point, but when you get to your halfway point, what you're going to do is bend those wires in so that you get this sort of going out and coming in effect. You can do it straight if you want, that's a different bail type, but you want to sort of get to the middle, bend those in, and then you would carry on weaving, and then you'll be able to bend that over your, whether you're doing it over a mandrel, whether if it's going to be a wide bail, you might want to do it over something like a thick felt pen, something like that. So once you've bent them over, we can pop our cabochon in. Let me pull those out of the way. And that will now sit, that should sit in your bezel. If not, we're going to tighten up our bezel with these 2 that I said earlier would be our tensioners. So that now should not fall through when you've done your bezel. Let me pull those in a bit tighter. There we go. So once we've got them secured like that, we're now going to take these. So these ones you're going to tuck underneath. These have wrapped around, and we will finish those off in a moment. These ones we're going to bend down, and we actually want to attach them to, I'm just going to lift those out of the way. So these we're going to finish on there, and we're going to wrap them around, so I'm going to just turn those up out of the way. And these ones we're going to fetch down, and then we're going to curve them out, and these form the structure at the back, and then gives that cabochon nowhere to go. So it sort of forms this barrier from the back. And to do that, we're going to trim off the ends. You want about 1/2 centimetre-ish, depending on your pliers. So take around those pliers, and you're just going to create a loop at the end. If it's too long, just carry on that into a bit of a scroll, because it just looks nice and decorative. Or just have a loop. It really doesn't matter. The reason you're putting a loop in is because you've got something to actually wire to. So we're then going to take a piece of wire, and where you've got a gap, what you're aiming for is to have this where there's no weave, and you're going to feed through. I'm doing it without the cabochon in because it just makes it easier for you to see. So you're going to go through there, then you should have that 0.4 gap between those two wires that you can pop that wire through, and you're going to do that a couple of times, and then take it as close as you can to there. You're not going to see it because it's at the back of it's going to be right at the back of the cabochon, so you won't really see it from the front. It's a little bit fiddly. You just want to put it a couple of times through to secure that loop through to that cabochon, and then finish off your ends by wrapping them around your loop. So you want to go about 3 times around your loop, and then you're going to trim them off and do the same with that side. So you do the same with all 4. With these ones, you can either take them to the front. Let me put my cabochon in. And you can use these as decorative things. So you've got all your 4 at the back, which is holding it in place. And if you want, you can take these across. You can do swirls, you can do all sorts. I personally like taking them round the back and finish them out of the way. So you tighten those up, do them nice and tidily, and tighten those out of the way. And then you can turn those just into, let me cut that off so you can't see it. And then these we're going to turn into loops. So again, like we did with the loops down here, we're just going to trim these off and create a loop that's going to go across the top of each of those. Gives you a nice rounded back for it, so you don't get any wires coming back towards you, and that is nice and done. And then the crossed ones trim off and tuck into that bail. You're just going to take those around, come here, and trap them into that bail and tucking them down, so that again you're not going to see them, they're out of way, they're not going to snag on anything. And then you can you've got that, everything out of the way, and all nice and tidy around the front. So regardless of whether you add the gemstones in like we've done on the example here, I'm just going to pop that over here for a minute, because what I want you to see is at the back how we've done it. So we've tied those in, so that cabochon can't come out because we've got these all securing it firmly in place. And because this is the V one as against the rounded, you can see you've just got the V, and then you've got the same either side. And unless you're doing it looking at it right from the side, you don't actually see where there's a tiny little bit of wire attaching the loops there. And that's how you do. You've got your lines across the top, so those are your tensioning lines that will really fetch that in and make it secure. Make sure you're not pulling it too tight that sort of this punches up. And there's, you've got your nice wide crisscross with your gemstones in the middle. And that's how you do your bezel setting. So now we're going to go on to the next chapter. In this chapter, we're going to look at creating a prong setting for a cabochon. This is great for any shape, because whether you have your prongs even, symmetrical, if it's a symmetrical shape, or whether you have them random, is personal choice. It doesn't affect the way it works apart from having that point of no return. So if you've got something that's a very irregular shape like a geode, this is a great setting for it, because it cares not. It cares not what shape it is. So I've also had some carved roses, and they're great because you can pop your prongs in the petals. So where those pinch points are, it's a natural place to put a prong which doesn't interfere with the design of the stone. Likewise, if you've got a highly patterned gemstone, for instance a dendritic opal, something that's got a real pattern on it that you don't want to hide, you can place your prongs at slightly irregular and to miss specific places. So it's a setting that's very forgiving on not being regular, not being even. It doesn't matter. Likewise, if you've got something like a round, so like the example we've got there, or if I grab this labradorite, which is basically a round, it doesn't really matter where you put those prongs, but I would be tempted to put them even. This one's a slightly, it's not quite a round, so you have got that point of no return to think about. So your prongs are going to go in what would be the corners of your oblong. So the point of no return is important. However, that point of no return doesn't have to be regular. So if you've got an irregular shape, this is a great setting to use. How do we make it? So the first thing is we want two pieces of wire. One is going to be longer than the other, because one is on the inside and basically is forming that step, that ledge that this is going to sit on, and the other one is going to form your prongs. The thing you have to remember with this, so we briefly talked about the point of no return in a previous chapter, coming upwards. So for these two, that's different, because this is quite steep and quite sort of angular. It's not a very curved. This is a very gradual curve in. So when we're doing a prong, we can actually virtually go no way up at all, and that's got to be really pushed to come out. With this one, you've got to go over that tip point up there, so you've got to go a lot further along before you've secured that, as against, down here it's going to slip out. That's too steep, basically. So if it's steep walled, and sometimes amethyst particularly, you can get very, very steep walled gemstones. So the prong setting is perhaps not the one you want to use. So that's something to think about when you're looking at what to use this setting for. Anything that's got a straight side and then a flat top is great for this, because you go straight up the side and then just tip over the top, and that's all you need to secure it, because it's got, but if it's a very steep slope, it's different. So let's get going. We're going to use this one as an example. So we're going to use a longer piece of wire, and you want it at least 10 centimeters longer than the other piece. So you need your extra 10 centimeters for your bail from each side, and you want 10 centimeters to create your prongs. I create my prongs. I have my prong setting pliers, which are just a flat nose pliers, but they have a very, very fine tip to them. This is great because if I show you on a scrap piece of wire, the profile of your pliers when you're making a prong can have an effect. So if I create a prong and turn it, I get a straight there and a round there. If I use my narrow bit, let me turn it that way. So if I use the tip of that, you get a much better flat, because there's not much there for it to go round. So the further down you can see on these pliers, the more of an odd shape you'd get. You'd go up one side and then sort of down the other side. You get this sort of angular misshape. So it makes it very difficult to make these regular. I would suggest, and I'm going to do it on this one, I would suggest you practice your making your prongs on a plain piece of wire before you actually go near your setting. So your prongs, how I make my prongs and get them consistent. The majority of gemstones, for instance this one, I know I can make a prong from there to there. Any of theirs. Most prongs, including that cabochon of labradorite we saw, at this end of my pliers, I know that would be deep enough to make it. So how do I decide that? Because I look at my pliers, if I hold that, I don't know whether I'll be able to show you vertically, then you can see plier sticking out beyond that prong, beyond that cabochon. I know that my prong then is going to be at least that deep, so it's going to be further than this, so it's going to be the right tipping point. If you need it to be very, very deep, like I said, it might be easier to look for a different setting type. So what you might want to do is think about any of the others, the bezel setting type or netting or one of the other methods to set it. So for this one, we're going to take our prong and you're going to use your pliers. You can mark this with an indelible pen. You're going to create your prong. Now don't pull your wire because you'll get a curve. If you hold your wire right up against the pliers and turn the pliers, you get a lovely right angle bend. So if I go down here and I pull that, you get a rounded bend. That's quite a good one, but you still get it rounded as against that, which is beautifully sharp. I'm then going to turn my pliers 90 degrees. So I've just done it that way, push the wire up, turn it 90 degrees, and then I'm going to push my wire in the opposite direction. So I'm going to push it away, so I get this sort of step effect. Turn it 90 degrees again and push it up. So what you end up with is a W, or an M if you hold it the other way. So this is going to form our prong. We now need to get these two parts of the W together. So this is where your thin profile pliers come, because you can pop those in there and start the bend and actually have a nice profile there. So you get that bend and they fit beautifully together. This is creating your prong. Now if I do several of those, I know they're all going to be the same size because they're using exactly the same place to create them. So you're creating your prongs and you're going to get a consistent set of prongs which looks much better. Again, if you've got an irregular shaped cabochon or stone that you're setting, you may need to have, it might be inconsistent in height, so you might need longer prongs in certain places. That's a different kettle of fish. The vast majority of cabochons tend to be of a similar depth, so we're going for that. Now you'll have noticed I haven't tightened the prongs, they're still a curve. At this point, when you've done all of your prongs, at that point you can actually open them up and move them. As soon, you've got to do it gently and you get like one shot extra at it. If you open this up, what is happening is you're work hardening it. As soon as you close that prong down, so as soon as you tighten it up by squeezing it, that part there is so work hardened, if I want to try and open that, it is very, very rare will you get that open without snapping it. That point there is so weak, and this time it's not going to do it, but basically that point there is exceptionally weak, and the chances are that one's done it. That's a soft piece of wire. The chances are another place is not going to do it, but that is now an exceptionally brittle piece of wire. So don't be tempted to close it until you've got everything. The main thing is for the sizing is, are these in the right place? Is that together, and is this in the right place? Once they're all in the right place, then we're going to go round and tighten them. So we're going to get them in the right place. Again, if you want, you could draw around your cabochon. You can put your wires, put a mark on your circle or your shape where you want your prong to be. What you have to remember, if you draw around the outside of it, as soon as you move that away, this is wider than your cabochon because you've drawn around the outside. So you've got to make sure that your wire would be on the inside of this, otherwise it's too big. So we're going to start off with a prong. So we're just going to bend it each way, bend it up and create our first prong. Now I would create them normally to go outside, so I'm going to flip that one over. You can flip them over, again don't flip backwards and forwards because you're work hardening. Every time you twist the wire, it work hardens. So we've now got a prong basically for that position. Take it around the curve. I would suggest you work from the back because you actually want it to sit just behind there. So you don't want it to be, it to be there, you want it to be, if you imagine there's a line around that, you want to do, you're colouring in inside the line basically. So we're going to want our second one there. So we're going to start off with a sharp bend, turn our pliers, and again to get our prong. Now the other thing you have to remember, this is 0.8 wire, if you're doing it with 0.8 or 1 mil, that prong is going to be 1.6 millimeters wide. So take that into account. If it's right on the edge of that corner, it means that this side is going to be too far over. So just take that into account when you're doing it. Fetch your wire up, all the way up. Don't worry if it's slightly misshapen. It doesn't matter if it's slightly squared and it's more oval. It's at the back. So long as it sits there, that's fine. It doesn't have to be a perfect match for the shape. But then you're going to look for your prong in that top corner. So you're going to go over and then pull that down. Now you can see I've had a weak point there. This is why we do the prong setting separate to our to creating the rest of it. You create this first because if you do have a problem with the wire, and that's a fault on the wire, then you want to be able to create it. So do your 4 prongs. We're going to imagine that one's there. So you're going to create your 4 prongs, turn it over. Remember to turn your prong setting over as well and double check that they're in. Let me move that out of the way. So you want to make sure that those are in the corners where you want them. Okay. When you've done those, we're going to curve this and put this on the inside. So that's going to sit on the inside of your shape. So you want it to conform to the shape of the wire with the prongs. Again, don't worry too much if it's not perfect because you're going to wrap this and that will pull them into the correct shape. So we're going to use our 0.4 again. You can use 0.25 for this. It is about strength, but it's not about the strength of the wire. The 0.25 will give you an extremely fine finish, but because you're wrapping it, you've still got that strength. So you don't have to worry about whether you're using 0.4 or 0.5. And what we're going to do is we're going to wrap, and we're just going to bind similar to that first setting in chapter 1. We're going to bind around. So you want them quite tight and you want them to lie flat. You don't want them to twist. If they start to twist, you want to take your flat nose pliers and put them back. So I'm going to try and make this one twist a bit. So if they're starting to twist, you want a flat surface. So you can take your flat nose pliers and turn them back so that it's got that flat surface, because that's what your cabochon is going to sit on. So you're going to go all the way round. Again, I've started it. You'll notice I start in the middle and work my way both sides, because you're checking your prongs, you're checking everything else as you go along. So as you get to the prong, go squidge your wire up, go all the way up to the prong, and then just basically jump onto the other side of it. What's that doing? That's locking the prong together and carrying on binding these. So you do that up both sides, and then we're going to have a look at what we do with the prongs afterwards. Once you've got it fully around, I'm going to move that one out of the way. Then you can go in, and this is the stage where you're going to close your pliers down, your prongs down. There are different ways of doing it, different techniques, different people have different ideas. Some people nibble at it, so they kind of do that to it. I like a slow steady, so I'll put it in the widest place I can, and you're trying to close those two together. Their instinct is to twist like that. That's what they'll try and do. It's quite difficult. You're trying to close two things that are side by side and get them closer to each other. Their instinct is to flip. So holding it with your fingers. If you're struggling with your fingers, hold it with another piece of another pair of pliers to hold it flat, and you're going to ease that together. So you're keeping a steady, constant pressure. You're not jabbing it, you're not nibbling it, just that slow, even pressure, and then you'll get that nice, even prong. When you've got your prong done, all the while checking that everything still fits in the right place. The most common thing that people do when they're first doing it is they end up with prongs that are miles too long. So this depth here, think about your pliers. How long is it going to be? If it's going to be bigger than that, then you're going to need either a bigger set of pliers to go from. So, I mean, you can do a really big prong setting with this part of the baling pliers if you wanted, because you've got that depth. That's an enormous prong. That's going to be a very, very deep or a very, very big cabochon. I mean, you can have big prongs if you want, and they can meet in the middle. You can measure them. So at the W stage, you can actually measure. And to do that, what you would do was you would create a prong on a piece of wire. And where you've got it to, so let's say we want one that's actually going to be that much bigger. So measure it, create it like that, and use that as a template. So when you go to create your own prong, you put that in place, you go, right, I put my pliers there, I bend it that way, I move my pliers there, and I bend it that way. So you're just following your template. So you can do it in other ways, but generally it's very rare you're going to use a bigger one. So when you've got to this stage, we're going to bend these in the same way as we did for the bezel setting in the last chapter, so that we get them so that they're tight. You want them to be slightly tighter than the cabochon allows, because you want it to clamp on it, okay? You can now close all your prongs, and we can now curl them up. So you want, depending on where your cabochon is and your setting, ours is right to the end here, so you can actually curl these almost from the end up. So we're going to put that there. That's your first proper test of that your prongs are in the right place, because that won't push through there. And you've got clear prong available to push over. If you push this directly over there, you'll never get it fully tight, because what happens is you'll push it onto there. All wire has a memory, so it will always try and revert back. So you always try and go slightly too far so that it springs that little bit back. So when you're pushing it over, you need a little help. And how I get that little help, you want the merest 2 millimeters at the end of that prong, and you're just going to tip it over, so that when you curl these in, can you see how that's already curving and following the line of that cabochon? So it's hugging the cabochon, whereas that one is just a straight line. Oh, are they trying to? There you go. That one's a straight line, and that one's curling round. You can't see the tip over the end. Okay, so I'm going to move on to this one. So we've got to the point where we've got our prongs almost curved. We've gone almost as far as we want, and we've got this tight point. Now, the reason I say we need to make sure that that's tight is what you want to do is have your prongs all curled over, so that you can hold it and know that that's not going anywhere. At the moment, that wouldn't hold that prong setting. That wouldn't hold that at all. So I'm going to tip that over, and then we're going to curl these prongs in. So we're now actually, and this is where, you know, this prong, the tip of this prong is now super hardened. If you go too far with your prongs, it doesn't matter because you're going to push them back out. When you're doing a pendant, it's easy because you've got one access point. If you're doing a ring, this is a closed circle, so it's more difficult. But this, you can leave that open, which is what we do, and then you can put that cabochon into that setting. Now, when I close this, that's not going anywhere. We've got the shape test, and we know that's not going anywhere. We know these prongs aren't perfect. That one's sticking up too much. I can't push that down properly, so I can open that up, get my round nose pliers, and just tip that over. If you've got something like fluorite or a softer gem, turquoise, you want to be careful with this next bit because you don't want to scratch it. So you're going to slightly open that up, pop your setting in. That is now, all those prongs are down, lovely. Don't mess with them for now. You're going to leave those completely alone until the very last minute. Every time you mess with those prongs, you're more work hardening it. And even at this stage, they can split there, and it's devastating if you're virtually finished and one of your prongs goes. So get them into position. You're not going to finish them off until the very last minute. So we're going to take this. You can do this bail. We did the bail. We've done two different types of finishing. You can do a straight bail. You can take this wire, and we're just going to wrap this one around, and that is now securing that into position. So we can now open those up. We can do a figure of 8 weave up through there and take that one over the top if you want. Or you can take these, in the example we've got shown, we can take all the ends and cut them across. So again, this is for something that's, it's more of an embellishment. So if you've got something that's, I want to say plainer, but I don't mean plainer because I don't think there's any plain gemstones. If you've got something with a solid colour, like an angel light, this has got a mottled colour, you're not going to interfere with the colour. If you've got something like a striped agate, you're going to go straight across the agate and you're going to lose the effect of that gemstone. Or if you've got something with a major effect on there, say a dogtooth amethyst, you don't want to cover it. So you'd finish these behind as before, but you can do your bail and then you can create these and just tuck them behind, trim them off at the back. And then we're just going to curl those into that setting so that they don't stick out and are secured in the way. This can also help when you're starting, because if you're creating your setting and you found it still a bit loose, by doing that it actually anchors the gemstone into place. So there are ways and means of doing that. So once you've done your best setting, like I say, like we've done before, and then you can end up with basically your finished piece. So after this one, we're now going to go on to the next chapter, which is about netting. In this chapter, we're going to look at netting. This is a great technique to use when you've got an uneven surface, because it'll mold to the surface. When you've got a really steep gemstone, this is great because it kind of hugs it on the way up, a bit like a bezel setting, only it's much more open. So if you've got a clear gemstone and you want that light to travel through, netting's great as well for that. You can do it with small gemstones, large gemstones. It's a nice way to do it. It's something that takes practice to get the technique. It's okay, and I'm going to show you a hack that will help you get consistent loops. But you do, when your first ones, keep your first one you ever make and then refer back to it, and you'll see how you quickly change, you quickly improve technique, but it will change. So We will start with a round. You can do any shape. Doesn't really matter. We're going to do a round one here. All you need to do is actually follow that shape with your wire. I've got 1mm here. I would tend to use 1mm rather than 0.8 unless it's a tiny gemstone. I've got the end of a cone maker, and that's about the right size. So you want some sort of mandrel. If it's a round one, it's a lot easier to use a mandrel to get that initial shape. Or if you've got some sort of stepper with the shape, just to get that basic shape. It definitely wants to be smaller than the actual cabochon. So that's the back of the cabochon. You want it to sit on the inside. We're then going to pull these out for our bail. So let's move those out. And again, you want to be, this is quite important. It's got to be, you're better off to do this slightly smaller than have it too big, because your gemstone will just fall through. So let's make that a little bit smaller than we need and make sure we go across. So bend your wires out of the way so you can get to that point and know that that's definitely inside. So your test is your egg and spoon. Can you balance it on the top and it's not going to fall through? Great. That's our first start. So we're going to use 0.4 wire. Now, this is not one you can do from the reel. This is you do start with a large piece of wire, depending on how many layers. So the example we've got here has actually got 4 layers of net. We'll probably get away with 3 layers of here, where you've got 3 on the side, 2 on the side, and then the larger loops which pull it all in, pull it tighter. So if I pull this off here, you can see on the side that you've got these 3 layers of netting, and then you have the extended loops, which are basically every other on the side, and you've got this 1mm on the inside, very definitely on the inside. So we're going to create that, and it's a nice decorative way. It doesn't matter. It's very tidy. If you flip it over to the back, it doesn't matter. It's just a very nice way. Again, it's quite unobtrusive, even though there's a lot of wire, but it's all thin wire. So we're going to create that. Let me pop that one back on there. So we're going to you've got to take your piece of wire off. Now, I know people can struggle with 0.4 wire. I would have about 1.5 meters, depending on the size of your cabochon. You can join in. I think it's a bit fiddly, and you can see it. It's not as inconspicuous, I think, if you join wire in. So I'd always try and do it. If you can't, don't worry. It's better that you join in than struggle and snag your wire. So how do we do the netting? We're going to start off with just binding those 2 together to hold them in the right place. So I'm just going to wrap a couple of times around there. Now, when you're doing your netting, you want to come underneath the loop, through the loop, and then through the 0.4 loop, so that that's to go upwards, so that when your net comes up, it's being pulled up from the bottom. Otherwise, it kind of sticks out. So if I grab this one again. So each of these nets has the wire coming from underneath it, and it's pulling, as you tighten it, it's pulling the top of this loop into the gemstone. If it was going the other way, it kind of doesn't pull it as tightly. So you're coming over the top of it rather than coming underneath it, and it's just sort of pulling out. So I'm going to pop that one back. There we go. So keep your tail out the way. We'll trim it off after. And you'll notice I've started with a couple of loops. That gives us a little bit of height. As you're going with your 0.4, just make sure if you do get any loops forming, you undo them straight away. Don't constantly run your fingers down the wire, because that's work hardening it. So handle it as little as possible, So when you go through and pull it through, you're actually pulling it from the end rather than sliding it. A lot of people slide it through their fingers. Create yourself a big loop of your 0.4, go through it and pull your wire. You don't want to be pulling this against this, so you don't want that effect, because that makes it quite difficult to pull the wire through, and also it's rubbing against it. What you want to be doing, I'm going to try and, is almost like that, so it's just sliding through so easily. Okay, so you want to slide it through till you've got a nice loop. This is not, I'm going to put my finger there so you can see it. This is not there's no right or wrong for the size. You can have tiny loops, you can have big loops. The smaller the loop, the more loops you're going to have, the more layers you're going to have. So it can look amazing, but it can take longer. So just be aware of that. Right, so the hack I said about, to get your wires consistent, once you've pulled it through, take your round nose pliers and just pop one of the prongs through. You can go down as far as you like. If you want to take them right to the bottom, I've got quite a fine pair, so you can be you could do it sort of part way. Again, I would mark it with an indelible pen so you know where you're going to. So you've got a consistent size now, because what you can do is next time you do it, you're going to grab the end of your wire, slide it through and underneath, and as you pull it down, it's not actually pulling against this frame, against the wire, it's just sliding nicely. Get it to where you think, roughly, that's got a bigger loop. Get your pliers, pop it through, and then you're going to start getting your consistent size. So once you've got the hang of that, and it takes a while, it took me ages to get consistent neatness with my sizing, that I could stop using the pliers. It doesn't matter, it takes a little bit longer, that's all. And if it gives you more consistency by doing it, then, and you want that consistency, then I would say do it. If you notice one after you've gone all the way around, again, it doesn't matter, you can just go in and ease it, and what it'll do is grab a little bit of wire from each of the other sections. So I know that one's a little bit smaller. I'm going to pop that in and just ease it out. And if you've gone all the way around and I wanted to do it that one, it will just pinch a little bit of wire from there and there, so it will even it up again. So keep going all the way round. When you've got to the other side, so I'm just going to simulate getting to the other side. Just let me come around here and effectively do a loop. So we're going to come around here, and this is going to be our last loop. So we've gone back to the beginning. We're now going to go through that first loop. So we're going to go now through our 0.4 loop rather than the center of the bail. So you're going to go through there. You're now pulling 0.4 against 0.4 wire. So don't be too strong, because you'll pull that out of shape. The softer your 0.4 wire is, the easier this technique is. So if you've got some really super soft, you can get some really nice soft wire that's like butter, then this is really, really easy. If you've got some that's quite hard, then it becomes a tougher thing to do, because it will pull it against it. So keep going round, and once you've done your second layer, depending on your gemstone, what you end up doing is, as you're doing your second layer and pulling that, it tends to pull it up a little bit. Do you see what I mean about when I said we'd go through the center and then down through the loop, and that causes that to pull up into your cabochon. So when your cabochon's there, it's actually pulling into your cabochon. So you keep going round. I'm going to come over here. I'm probably about 2/3 of the way around this one, and you can see it's already started to pull up. This isn't lying flat, it's already started to pull up and sit around our cabochon. Now, like I say, this one I probably get away with just doing the 2 layers. When you've got your cabochon so far, and you can ease it up. It is 0.4 wire, but people misunderstand 0.4 wire is actually still quite a strong wire. Yes, you can break it, but you have to go some. You can, if you pull it the right way, it won't break, if you see what I mean. So you can work hard on it, but you can also get it to sit where you want it. So you're now pulling these up, and if you notice, I've changed position. So instead of doing it that way and pulling it along, I'm still pulling in that same direction, but I'm actually putting it up through, and I'm pulling it so that it is coming against. So instead of being here and pulling it, I'm actually using the cabochon to pull it into place. That all the time is pulling this netting into position. So pop it through. Oops. Just want to say, be careful of your 0.4 wire. If it gets in a twist because it's not straight, just be careful how you pull it through and make sure it's not going to get snagged. Here we go. The more gentle you are, the better it'll be. It'll protect itself. So we're going to do the last few, and then I'm going to show you the top layer. Let's go through. Your wire can get quite curly. That's why the softer the wire is, the better. You don't, if you ever get this, don't try and pull it straight, undo it. Undo it the other way. So always back out of a loop, because as soon as you've let that loop go, a bit like the prong, that area, if it gets tightened, becomes exceedingly work hardened, and you've got very little chance of undoing it without breaking it. So take care to back it out. There we go. Now this one hasn't come through yet, so we're going to pull that through there. Come on. It can help to just sort of catch the end as you're pulling it up. At this stage, this cabochon can pop out of here. This isn't enough to hold that cabochon in place because we haven't gone past our tipping point. So we've got to make sure we've got to do these last few, and I'm just going to cut that bit off the end. If it's got really snagged, just get rid of that bit, because that's never going to straighten up anymore, and that's just going to be a problem. So I'm going to get rid of that bit. Now I've got 3 more to do. It can look really good, this technique can look really good with different coloured wires. Right. When you get, I just want to explain something here. This is being very springy. When it's getting springy like this wire is getting now work hardened. So the harder it is, the more springy it's likely to become. So I am being extra careful, because at this point I don't want it to break. So when you've gone back to the beginning, we're now going to start jumping. So to go up to our next level, I'm going to skip one and go through the next one. So you get these longer, they're quite decorative, but they do have a function. So by putting these longer ones in, I want to make sure I've got a curve in there. What it's doing is coming a lot further into the cabochon. So you're covering a bigger area, but it's tightening it because you're covering that area. And go, if this is quite tight, the idea is go where there's a join. So if you go under where there's a join, just ease that one out. There we go. There's always a way in. And you can see how this is now completely covering the top. not covering it, but going past that point of no return and making this a very, very secure setting. So you keep going round there until you get back to the start. Let me pop that one back on there. And then this will be completely secure because this top layer is hugging that. If it's a hardened wire, you can see this is sticking out a little bit. You can just go and ease those joins down a little bit. It depends on your wire for them to stick out, but that will completely hold that in place. And then you just deal with the bail as before. You can either create a very simple bail, and I'll quickly show you the easiest bail you can do, and that's wrap one of your wires around the other to lock them together, and then basically you're just going to do a loop. And this is, like I say, by far the easiest bail you can do, and handy if you want to interconnect these. So you can use this loop to actually connect to a previous cabochon. Just put a loop in the bottom, and then you've got by far the simplest bail you can make. But again, nothing wrong with it. Make sure it's a little bit tighter than that to get it into place. There we go. And that will give you a very, very, very quick, simple bail. But if you do a series of these, and I've put 3 in a row before now, and you can have a loop in this initial wire, and then just attach that to the loop, and you can actually chain them together. You can do a bracelet like that, you can do a pendant like that, but that's how you do your netted one, and it's a very good form of doing all sorts of shapes, and very, very deep and unusual shapes. So this is your finished netting setting for your cabochon. During this tutorial we've covered the 4 different types. We've done the simple setting, we've moved on to the bezel setting with the nice wirework detail, we've covered the prong setting, and we've then finished with the netted setting. I hope you've enjoyed watching it. I'm Alison Tarry. This is the JewelleryMaker Academy, and we hope to see you here again soon.